Hello, and welcome to Struggle to Strength. Through this series, I started it in September 2021. And the goal is to highlight my clients and collaborators' stories of the strengths that they developed as a result of the struggles that they experienced. And in case we've never met before, my name is Mary Beth Simone. I am the founder of Niche Partnership Consulting, and my business resulted from a personal struggle that I was able to navigate and turn into a business. And with this series, I hope to inspire you to connect the dots between your struggle and strength story to see what you could bring to life as a result of that. And today's topic, today I'm doing a solo episode. So I started this uh, series a year ago, September. And now I'm finally coming full circle, and I'm going to tell you what inspired that series. Back in 2020, and I would love if you have any comments, if you want to let me know that you're here and you're watching, please drop an emoji or a message in the comments, and so I'll know that you are here for this broadcast. So, a little bit of background behind this series. So, back in 2020, I enrolled in Speaking Your Brand's Thought Leadership Academy. Now, you may recognize Carol Cox, the founder, hey Kim, of Speaking Your Brand, and Diane Diaz, who is the lead speaking coach, from guest appearances on this series, Struggle to Strength. And when I joined the Thought Leader Academy back in 2020, my initial goal was to create a new signature talk in preparation for post pandemic events and getting ready for in person opportunities. And what surprised me is that the combination of what was happening in my personal life, together with being in the Thought Leader Academy, inspired me to create a TED style talk instead. And that is not something that was on my radar or was not a goal of mine when I went into the Thought Leader Academy. So here's what happened. Two of my top strengths in Clifton Strength Finders is futuristic and achiever. So even though our lives were pretty much stalled by the pandemic, I wanted to make the most of it. That's kind of the way that I operate. I wanted to make the most of the time that I had since I was going to be really focused here on at home base, not traveling to work with clients, not traveling socially. Um, and I was no longer teaching body balance at the Y. So I thought maybe this is a good time to take care of something that was a challenge for me. So I had been struggling with a hip issue and decided to try and get that taken care of and get it fixed. So I found a great surgeon, um, and I had surgery at Penn in August 2020, right after my birthday. Great way to celebrate, huh? It actually was. It was. I felt so good to get this taken care of, and everything went well. I was walking without crutches after about 3 days. When I went into the office to see the physician's assistant, I walked in without any assistant. She was shocked. And I went in to get the stitches removed. And up till this point, I did not know for sure what they had found. I had a suspicion what they would find, but I did not know. So I asked her what they found when they went in. And she said that they removed a mass of scar tissue that was the size of a tendon. And she also, at that time, she asked me if I did a lot of core exercises. And that made me laugh because nobody had ever asked me that before because I don't look like the kind of person who does a lot of core exercises, but I do. I do core workouts 2 to 3 times a week, and she said that they could tell when they cut into me. And she said, "Your core is stronger than mine." And she was in her 20s. So I was like, "Wow, that's really." I'm amazed that she said that, and it was, like, great to hear that. So, having this surgery was such a huge transformation for me because I thought I knew what the scar tissue was from. And every time that I felt that pain in my hip, getting up from the chair after meditating for 20 minutes or trying to sleep on that side or doing seated forward folds when I taught body balance at the Y, it reminded me of what happened. So it was a Sunday morning, and I was 5 years old, and we were getting ready to go to church. And I was all dressed up in my green and white dress and my black Mary Jane shoes. And my parents had had an argument the night before, and I wanted to know what it was about. So I always loved to be up in the middle of adult business. I found other kids to be generally boring. I loved to know what was going on with adults. And so my father was walking up the stairs that morning, and I ran to catch up to him. And I asked him, "What were you and mom arguing about last night?" And he stopped on the stairs and turned and looked at me and said, "Do you really want to know?" And I said, "Yes." And he backhanded me, and I went flying down to the bottom of the stairs. And I landed seated, and it knocked the breath out of me. I couldn't breathe. It was really scary. I never spoke about that to either of my parents. I never told my mother. Of course, she was going through a lot, obviously, because of all of the arguing. She was going through a lot of her own stuff. I never mentioned it again to my father. And anytime that I would have a back x ray, the tech would ask, "Have you been in a car accident?" And I'd say, "No, I never was in a car accident." I knew that the scar tissue that they removed at Penn Surgery Center was caused from that day when I was 5. And when the physician's assistant mentioned my strong core, I thought, "You have no idea how strong I am." And when I think about these comments, it also reminds me of a time that I wrote an article for Authority Magazine, and I shared it with one of my coaches, Amanda Berlin. She is a PR strategist, and I shared it with her and asked her to read it before I submitted it for final publication. And her feedback, part of her feedback was that she could tell that I had been dealing with emergencies since I was a child. And I was surprised. I was like, I felt seen. I wasn't exactly sure how did she get that from what I wrote, but she was right. And when I came back to the Thought Leader Academy after the surgery, I told the group that through this whole experience, I realized that struggling to navigate so many emergencies as a child is one of the things that makes me great as at guiding people through creating their contingency plans. And that I had, since this experience, decided to write a TED style talk instead of writing a new signature talk. So after writing that TED style talk, that's when I committed to create this LinkedIn Live series in hopes that it would help other people connect the dots in their struggle to strength stories. And now that brings me to you. So every time that I have shared this story, the listener tells me about how they connected the dots in their own story, in the story in their life. So I'm curious, what have you managed and navigated and responded to in your life that you know has created a strength in you? So, why it's important for you to share your story is that many people say that they are too ashamed or embarrassed to tell these personal stories, like the one I just shared with you. And I was ashamed as well. I always felt like getting thrown down the stairs was my fault. I would feel ashamed when I had an x ray. I just didn't want anyone to know what happened. And as an adult, after lots of personal work and therapy, I now know that the shame that I was carrying was actually my father's shame, the shame for his behavior. And the reason it's important for us to share our stories is because when people listen to our stories, they're putting themselves into our story. They're connecting the dots in their own stories. So sharing your story quickly changes from being about the storyteller to being about the listener. And that's how we start healing. We inspire others to rise above their challenges. And we kind of share this recipe for spreading health in our community. So I created a framework that I would like to share with you. And I use this to describe how we grow through our struggles and into strengths. So let's take a look at this. So this is the grow framework. Oh, and I wanted to tell you that my guest, Cynthia Oswald, who was on the last episode, she is an artist and she is a brand specialist. And so I shared my concept with Cynthia, and she created this beautiful illustration. Uh, I will not show you the way that I started with the illustration because I am not an artist, but this turned out just so beautifully. So when we think about the grow framework, so it's G is for gravitate, R is recognition, O is overuse, and W is wisdom. So G is gravitate is when we, emerge from our early life, we tend to gravitate towards things that are familiar and to areas where we can use the skills that we have developed. So for me, this looked like being attracted to very stressful and demanding work environments. So I was in financial services for over 30 years, and I worked in areas that were very high stress. So this one group that I loved working in, we would start work at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we would do all of the financial calculations for the money that could be invested that day when the stock market opened at 9 a.m. So I was like an assistant supervisor, so I oversaw the team. I validated all of the calculations and had to have the information to the traders by 9 a.m. So started at 6. And then in that group, we also did dividend calculations. So we would work until uh, 9 or 10 o'clock at night, once or twice or several times a month, depending on the time of year. And it was very stressful at the end of the year for year end calculations, lots of hours. That's the kind of work I was attracted to, really high stress. Um, and what keeps us there is the recognition that we get. So I would get, I got promoted, I got bonuses, I got raises because I was so good at navigating all of the pressure and the demands, so the schedule and all of that. And then eventually, what I found to be true, and I don't know if you would see this, if you see this in your life, but eventually that strength that I had of being able to navigate a lot of challenges was something that I overused. So it can lead to burnout when we overuse a particular strength and just let it be the way that we show up. It's like our leading aspect of the way that we show up in the work that we do in our life. And then eventually, overuse leads to burnout. It can lead to exhaustion. It can lead to being dissatisfied with the the work that you have chosen to do for so long. And that is where I see that wisdom comes in. And that's where we evolve to be able to uh, have more of a say on how we use that strength and what we're willing to and not willing to do. Um, so I'm curious if any of this resonates with you on your journey, on your personal journey. So, one example of how this showed up for me was when I started my business. Well, what inspired my business to start is that I was uh, there to support my friend as she was navigating a life threatening illness. So she had pancreatic cancer. And at one point, she asked me if I would be willing to help her husband navigate the retiree benefits and the finances if she didn't survive. And of course, I said yes. Um, and then, she did pass away, and it was very challenging work um, to be grieving and to have all of this business to take care of. And so, as I got my business up and running, that was when I realized what I really want to do is help people prepare for the unexpected rather than to be the one to step in and help them after an emergency has already happened. And so that's one example of how the wisdom shows up, and we can take control of our strengths and harness the benefits that we have developed um, without overusing it and bringing ourselves into a depleted state. So that is the story behind Struggle to Strength. And I am curious if the idea of struggle to strength resonates with you. And I would love it if you would share with me now or even later in the comments where you see this connection in your own life. And what strengths have you developed that you know are related to your struggles? And I encourage you to share your story. Because when you share your story, you're giving people permission and encouragement to connect the dots in their struggle to strength story. So I know episode was long overdue, a year into the series, uh, but I think that it's more meaningful now after seeing the other guests who have been on the show, and now to hear the origin of this series. So, Struggle to Strength airs on the first and third Tuesday of every month at 2 p.m. generally, unless a guest asks for a different time. Uh, so, we will be back in 2 weeks, and I would love to hear your feedback on this episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a great day.